Hi guys, Olive here today to talk about my TBR for Nonfiction November 2024 and to share some recommendations for each of our 4 challenges. If you missed the announcement video for this year's event, I will link that video for you below and up in the cards. It has all of the information that you need, but the gist of it is that Nonfiction November is a month-long reading initiative during which you are challenged to read a little bit more nonfiction than you ordinarily would. So if you don't read any nonfiction right now, try to pick up at least one book. If you already read a little bit, try to read a little more. If you already love nonfiction, you could give the whole of your reading month over to reading nonfiction if you want to. It's entirely up to you. Just as long as you read at least one nonfiction book during the month of November, you can count yourself as a participant. It is a very choose your own adventure style of reading initiative. You really get to determine what it looks like for you, but every single year, just for some added fun, I've come up with 4 one-word challenges. They are words that can be interpreted in a wide variety of ways. They could have multiple different definitions. They can mean whatever you want them to mean. You can use these words to help you select your books if you want to. They're there just as a tool to help you narrow things down if you feel like it's worthwhile for you. And this year, our challenge words are code, path, shot, and join. In this video, I'm going to go challenge by challenge. I will give you a couple of recommendations for each of the challenge words, books that I think would work really well for those challenges. And then I will also share what books I've chosen to put on my TBR for each of these challenges. And if any of the books I talk about today sound interesting to you, I've actually teamed up with my friends over at Threadable, and we have made available free, absolutely free samples of every single book I'm going to be talking about in today's video. You can click the links in the description box below that will take you directly into the text. You can start reading. You can share your thoughts on these books in the margins. A few of the books that I'm going to be speaking about today, I've already sampled and annotated on Threadable, so you can hear my early thoughts. You can see what you think of these before committing to putting them on your TBR, either Nonfiction November or otherwise. So click the links in the description box below to start reading. So let's start off with the first challenge, which is code. And I think this is a word that lends itself really nicely to any kind of book on the STEM topics, which are science, technology, engineering, and math. But I feel like the word code could also be applied to legal matters. It could be a book about a cipher, like cracking a code. It could be about a dress code, like fashion. It could even be about morality and ethics, like a code of conduct. My first recommendation for this challenge is a very straightforward one because it is called The Code Book by Simon Singh. This is a history of cryptography, of codes and code breaking from ancient times all the way up to the modern day. So if you have a thing for mystery or encryption, this would be a good selection for the challenge. But what about a different kind of a code is my next recommendation. It is The Violinist's Thumb by Sam Keane. This is a book all about DNA and genetics. It's a history of our understanding of our own genetic code. It also includes discussions about DNA and mutations, which he very intriguingly in this book compares to language. I thought that was a really interesting addition. Sam Keane is an incredibly popular nonfiction writer. He's one of those writers who will inform you and engage you at the exact same time, because as he's giving you all of this scientific information, he's also telling stories that relate back to the information that he's sharing. So it's really, really easy to stay invested in his books. So if you've not read any of his books before, or if you've just yet to read this specific one from his bibliography, Nonfiction November might be a good time to do that. But now I'll share which 2 books I will be reading for the code challenge. And of course, for this one, I had to lean into the technology interpretation because coding as a profession is a very big topic in my household because I'm married to a software engineer who has programmed video games in addition to his day job. He used to do that. He's looking to get back into doing that. He's just a really, really cool guy. And so we talk a lot about what he does for a living and also about video games. So I think together we're actually going to be reading a brand new release called Play Nice by Jason Schreier, who, in case you don't know his name, is a very important video games journalist. This is a deep dive into the history and the scandals of the video game company Blizzard, who is behind games such as StarCraft, Diablo, Overwatch, and probably most notably World of Warcraft. My husband, I think, has played all of their games. I've only played World of Warcraft on and off over the years, but we both know a good amount about some of the things that have happened at Blizzard. Good and a lot of bad. I know my husband is a lot more informed than I am because he keeps up with the video game world, but I will be so interested to read this book. Jason Schreier is so good at what he does, but also I'm really looking forward to those conversations with my husband. My second TBR pick for the Code Challenge is a little bit more of an abstract interpretation, so I will explain my reasoning. I have wanted Code to be one of our challenges for Nonfiction November for years now. I just could never make it work with the other challenges before this year. But I knew when I finally did get to make Code one of our Nonfiction November words, one of my TBR picks was always going to be Scenes from My Life by Michael K. Williams. Michael K. Williams was a tremendously talented actor who unfortunately struggled with a lot of issues with addiction, and that's what led to his early death. He actually died right before this memoir was completed, so he didn't even get to see his own book come out. And from everything I've seen about this book and read of it thus far, this is one of the ones that I read and annotated over on Threadable, so you can read my early thoughts on this one if you want to. In this book, he talks about those struggles, but he also talks about his work, and not just his acting work, but also his work out there in the community. I knew I always wanted to read this one for the Code Challenge for a couple of different reasons, one of them being that central morality that he had to go out there and help others who face similar struggles as him. But also because I feel like it fits so flawlessly with something that my favorite character of his always used to say on The Wire. Omar Little had a tagline, and that was, "A man's gotta have a code." Moving on to our second challenge word now, which is the word path. And as I said in the announcement video for Nonfiction November, I feel like this challenge is just tailor-made for nonfiction books that have anything to do with travel. So books that involve travel, books that involve just moving from place to place, a nonfiction book about a place you would like to travel to. It could be a nonfiction book about a famous road or even waterway. It could be a nonfiction book that involves wayfinding or even just taking a walk. My first recommendation for this challenge just has to be The Salt Path by Rainer Wynn, a nonfiction book that many of us here on BookTube have read and loved. It's a very raw, very honest memoir about how the author and her husband, after losing their family home following a terrible investment decision, and after getting the news that her husband was facing a likely terminal diagnosis, they decided to start walking the Southwest Coast Path, which is the longest footpath in England. It was a very hard journey, but it was one that they almost spiritually needed to take. So not only is this a nonfiction book about movement, it is also very moving. I think if you like nonfiction books like Wild by Cheryl Strayed or A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson, this would make a fantastic choice for the Path Challenge. Or you could choose to pick up another nonfiction book that I absolutely adored called Rough Magic by Laura Pryor Palmer. This is another memoir. This one is by the youngest ever winner of the Mongol Derby, which is a 1,000-kilometer horse race across Mongolia that recreates Genghis Khan's horse messenger system. She tells her story so incredibly beautifully in this book. It will absolutely take your breath away. And if you're someone who enjoys pairing up fiction with nonfiction, team this one up with a read or even a reread of Shakespeare's The Tempest. Just trust me on this one. Now, when it comes to what I will be reading for the Path Challenge, I've been looking for a good excuse to finally pick up American Dinosaur Abroad by Ilya Newland. I got this book at an author event all the way back in 2019, and I've been meaning to read it ever since. It's a book that covers the history of how Pittsburgh's #1 tycoon, Andrew Carnegie, not only sponsored missions to excavate dinosaur fossils out west, but then, as an act of diplomacy, he had plaster casts made of the largest dinosaur they found, the Diplodocus, and he sent those plaster casts to different European world leaders. It sounds fascinating. I loved hearing this author talk about it. I think this fits the Path Challenge really nicely because of how far that original fossil and all of its replicas traveled all over the world, but also Reading this book will give me a really good excuse to go on my own little field trip. It's been a while since I've been to the Carnegie Museum of Natural History here in Pittsburgh. I want to pay a visit to the original Diplodocus, who we very lovingly call Dippy. My other pick for the Path Challenge is pretty on the nose because the word is right there in the title. It's called In Praise of Paths by Torbjorn Ekelund. And this is a book all about the joy of walking. This author had to give up driving after he was diagnosed with epilepsy, and so he began going everywhere on foot. So he talks about that transition within this book, but he also interweaves history and literature about getting around on foot. I actually just finished up a 5-week-long step challenge, so I'm definitely more in the habit now of getting in regular walks, and I love the idea of, in November, hunting down the audiobook for this one and listening to it while I'm out on walks getting some fresh air. Our third challenge is the word shot, and the meanings for this one really do run the gamut, because you could pick up a nonfiction book about medicine or military history, sports, photography, alcohol, or even a topic that's totally new to you, since you would be giving it a shot. We'll go with that medicine interpretation for my first recommendation, because it's The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris. This is a fascinating, if understandably pretty grody look at how this young Quaker doctor completely revolutionized the surgical field during the Victorian era with his practical application of germ theory and his use of early antiseptics. Things were pretty nasty before he changed the game, so especially if you've ever had surgery, you will find yourself to be extremely appreciative of his efforts. For this challenge, I of course have to recommend a basketball book, and if you would like to learn about some sports history while also laughing a ton, please do consider picking up one of my favorite sports books that I've ever reviewed, called Tall Men, Short Shorts by Lee Montville. In this book, sports writer Lee Montville recounts the 1969 NBA Finals, which the underdog Boston Celtics surprisingly won. So this book combines history and player statistics, of course, but it also has a memoir component, because it just so happens that at this time that the 1969 finals were going on, Lee Montville was a very young sports reporter covering those finals. He is now a much older man, so as he's looking back at this time in his life, he pokes just so much fun at his younger self. It is tremendously entertaining. He is so good at writing about the sports, you don't even really need to care about basketball to get a lot out of this. You will also just want to keep reading because this author is so personable. You will want to keep reading just to spend more time with him. A straight up memoir that's on my personal TBR for the Shot Challenge fit this word so perfectly in several different ways that I knew I had to add it to my TBR. It's called It's What I Do by Lindsay Addario. This was written by an American photojournalist whose work focuses on conflict and human rights issues. So she spends a lot of time in countries that are dealing with political instability and violence. And she's trying to capture photographs to share the truth of what's going on with the world. But as she's trying to capture her shot, she faces the real risk of being shot. This is one of the books that I annotated the early chapters of over on Threadable, so you can read my early thoughts if you're interested. As I suspected, this is very hard-hitting material, but it's also incredibly important, which is definitely motivating me to keep on reading. My other TBR pick for this challenge is much less serious, but still sounds very interesting nonetheless. It's a book called Moonshine by Jamie Joyce. This is obviously leaning into that alcohol interpretation of the challenge, although actually taking a shot of moonshine is probably inadvisable since it is 100 proof, unaged, and therefore clear whiskey, essentially. By definition, moonshine is any untaxed liquor made in an unlicensed still, and it has had quite the history here in the United States of America, especially during Prohibition. I imagine I'm going to read some interesting stories in this one. But then our final challenge word is join. And as I said in the announcement video, this word evokes, for me anyway, togetherness, community, belonging, family. So I think a ton of memoirs would be perfect for this. Definitely food writing. I was thinking an essay collection, since you're joining together a bunch of essays in one collection, but also books on psychology, religion, even business, anything to do with groups, really. On that note, I think this challenge is a wonderful invitation to pick up Cultish by Amanda Montell if you haven't already. It's a book all about the language that straight up cults or other culty types of organizations use to first pull people in and then to keep them towing the line. It's very manipulative language because humans are very group-oriented creatures. We crave belongingness, togetherness. We want to be a part of something. And these organizations prey on that natural human psychology to keep people under control. If you're anything like me, you will walk away from the reading experience of this book with not just a greater understanding of the power of language, but also a heightened sense of empathy for people who get sucked into cults. The next book I'll recommend also has to do with hospitality, but in an infinitely more positive way. I can't think of a book that's more perfect for the Join Challenge than Be My Guest by Priya Basil. This is a very short essay collection that explores topics of food and family, what it means to be a host, what it means to be a guest, the joy that can be found in conversation and togetherness. This is just so lovely. It's a very quick read. It'll absolutely make you want to host your own dinner party in a hurry. It actually inspired me to do that. I was really missing hosting dinner parties right after lockdown, so I actually made a video in which I hosted a mock dinner party as I discussed this book. It's probably one of the most unique videos I've ever made, but it was so much fun. I will link that below and up in the cards if you would like to see that video and hear more about this book. The first of two books that I'll be reading for the Join Challenge is all about a collaboration. It is called Putting It Together by James Lapine. This is a book about the 2-year process that it took to create the musical Sunday in the Park with George, which, if you don't know anything about it, if you've never seen it before, it is such a cool, unique show that brings this 19th century painting that you almost certainly have seen before. It brings it to life. It makes the people within this painting characters within the musical. I first saw a production of it back in 2019 and I was absolutely blown away. So when this book came out, I knew I wanted to read it. I thought this worked so perfectly for the Join Challenge because of the number of people it took to bring this show to life, and also because this book contains extra elements like music and script notes and sheet music, just all these other little added things that really bring me inside the creative process, so I feel like I'm joining in on the fun. My final pick for my Nonfiction November TBR, my other selection for the Join Challenge, is going to be Never Home Alone by Rob Dunn. This book is all about the creepy crawlies that we share our spaces with, knowingly or unknowingly. Ever since this book came out, I have been simultaneously pulled in by it, but also repulsed by it. I've just been morbidly fascinated by it. I wanted to sample it first to see if I could handle it before deciding to put it on my Nonfiction November TBR, so I sampled it over on Threadable, and I loved what I read. It reminded me so much of I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong, a book all about microbes. He's talking about similar subject matter in the earliest chapters of this book, and I love his writing style. So I'm definitely going into this one now, fearless. I know I can handle it. And if you want to see what I get like when I am geeking out over some really cool nonfiction, check out my commentary on Threadable. So those were my recommendations and my TBR picks for our 4 challenges for this year's Nonfiction November, the last one I am going to be hosting. As I said before, if you're interested in reading any of the books I spoke about today, you're considering putting them on your TBR, your regular TBR, or even your Nonfiction November TBR, and you want to sample them first. You want to do a little bit of a try a chapter tag before you commit. Do check out the links in my description box that will take you right into the text, and you can start annotating, reading completely for free over on Threadable. I'm also going to include a link to my circle over on Threadable, Well, I've been using that app for years, so there are even more nonfiction picks that you can explore, hear my thoughts on if you need even more ideas for Nonfiction November. Let me know in the comments below what your recommendations for these challenge words would be. You can also tell me what you're planning on reading for Nonfiction November. You can tell me here in the comments, and/or find us everywhere on social media. Definitely use the hashtag Nonfiction November so people can find your posts. We have a Goodreads group if you want to join me and a bunch of other readers there. We have a very robust community in that group because it's been going since the very start of this event. So definitely join the Goodreads group if you're on Goodreads. We have an Instagram where we're hosting a post per day, a pick per day challenge. If you're interested in joining in on that, I will also be posting a lot on Instagram. We have a TikTok. We also have a Storygraph challenge where you can track your progress with these challenge words if you're choosing to take them on. Be sure to link up with us everywhere you are on social media for some great content leading up to the month of November and throughout the entire month. Thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to hear what you're planning on reading for Nonfiction November, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.